So I decided that I was going to seven my way through life today.
Well, that oh,
It's going better than it was yesterday. I was pissed.
usually when I try to seven way through something, it doesn't go well.
So first thing that happened was Keegan broke his glasses.
The expensive ones.
They were on the floor and he was playing in his room and he stepped on them. So that happened and I was like, it happened yesterday. So we didn't even make it a week. Not even a week. 6 days. So he came down the stairs yesterday and he was like, as he was walking down the stairs, he's like, Mommy, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, oh God, what? Like takes him out from behind his back. He's like, I stepped on them. I was like, dude. And I got mad. Then I felt guilty about being mad, but then I'm like, no, you had 7 other places that you could set those glasses in your room, and you chose the floor. What kind of sense does that make? It doesn't. And Keston has spilled, I think, about 7 glasses of water today. 7.
At least it's just water.
7. Look at you.
Look at me.
You're sevening. At least it's just water.
At least it's just water.
It's just water. That's what I told him. It's like, you know what? We're going to get the glasses fixed. We have another pair. Good news.
We're all gonna be fine.
It's going to be so fine. It's fine.
I might leave some of that in. We'll see. Some of that was good. What? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, ready.
All right.
Let's hit it.
So, how's it going, Tannah?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. I feel like that was an awkward beginning if I leave any of that other stuff in, so now I'm gonna have to cut this part out.
Nah.
Anyway, today
Anyway.
we're talking about sevens.
This
Uh,
feels 7. Leave it in. This is the best
leave it
intro
in.
yet.
So let me give the Enneagram Adventure spiel. So this is our podcast, Tannah and I's podcast. It's called Enneagram Adventure. Tannah and I are both IEQ 9 certified coaches. Use the Enneagram to help in our own personal development and people around us with their development. Really appreciate the tool, the awareness that it provides, all those things. I realized last week when we recorded 6, I forgot to say this part, so I'm going to say it today in the 7 episode. And that is that what makes the Enneagram different from other personality profiles that you might be aware of is the fact that it's looking at core motivation as opposed to just behaviors or things like that. I think all of that said, we're ready to riff on all things 7. And 7s are often called the enthusiast or the enthusiastic visionary, things of that nature. I love a 7 most of the time. Most of the time. I also always say this, Tannah's heard me say this multiple times. If I could choose my Enneagram number, I would choose to be a 7. So we can't kick this podcast off and not say that. At least I can't. What do you want to add about 7s, Tannah?
The 7s that I have in my life bring out some of the best in me and some of the worst. I love a 7 for those reasons. The work in that for me is when I'm showing up at my worst. Why is that? But I think for the 7s who are listening, or for the people who have 7s in their lives, you know who we're talking about. And the enthusiastic visionary makes 100% them. They are positive, they are fun, they are jovial, they are always looking on the sunny side of life. And when life gives them lemons, they usually positively reframe into lemonade. But I think that is the only thing that I would add for like an overarching view of a
7
7.
thing. In every podcast, we've talked a little bit about where the motivation comes for each number or what it is.
Yep.
And 7's motivation is to avoid pain and boredom, really at the very, that's the most sort of basic way of saying it. There's obviously nuance to it, but they have a strong desire for freedom. They don't want to be tied down by anything. I've heard 7s talk about that motivation and how that was developed in them in childhood in a couple different ways. One 7 I know talked about growing up, he felt like a feral cat. Like he just had freedom. It was given to him freely. He could run around the neighborhood. Nobody was checking up on him. It was sort of, be home by X time. And that was all the direction that he got and got to kind of live this free, uninhibited childhood. I've heard some talk about it that way. Another seven I know talks about it from the standpoint of that growing up, she heard a lot from her dad in particular that she was the joy and light of his life. And he would say that to her regularly. So it just really stuck with her, this idea of being joyful, being lighthearted, being fun. It's a little bit about how that can develop. But they are, all the sevens I know are spontaneous. They're kind of always looking for the next fun thing to go do. Sometimes it's adventurous, sometimes maybe it's a project or something like that, but always
Mhm.
kind of seeking the next exciting thing. What am I
Yeah.
missing there?
I think the only thing you're missing is the avoidance of pain, where pain often is synonymous with something negative or bad, right? So whether it be emotional pain, emotional strain, or conflict, right? All examples of
Yeah.
that. Seven is going to avoid those at all cost.
I think it is important distinction to call out the emotional pain is what they're avoiding, because I do know some sevens that are athletes and down for kind of some of the physical challenges that some people might consider painful. So it is important to have that distinction of that it's emotional pain that
Hmm.
they're attempting to avoid. When I think about the seven and for fives, and when we get to start talking about lines and numbers, it'll make some
Yep.
more sense. But fives on their stress line go to seven. And so there are some behaviors that when I'm particularly stressed come out that are very seven-ish. So it might be worth just taking a minute. We can just go on those sort of stress behaviors for a second. But sevens, when they're in a less healthy space, and fives, when they're in a really stressed place, they can become really scattered and sort of lose the ability to really concentrate on a single task. It can look like just jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing rather than being able to sort of dive in and take something to completion. It can also show up for sevens in this desire to escape. So a seven could be as they're trying to avoid something that makes them feel bored or something that could feel painful. They could get, like, oh, well, I'm going to drop this and do something completely different as a means of escaping that thing. Or it could be sort of constantly planning a vacation or I don't know, wanting to move. It's this desire to change something and escape from the reality that they're currently sitting in that can come up for sevens when they're in an unhealthy space. When they're more healthy, they're able to kind of recognize those patterns and sit in them and maybe use their lines to help them take something to completion. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
missing some stuff along there.
Some of my favorite seven tendencies that you've ever shared are your stress stories, and I find them fascinating. I
So,
think you need
yeah,
to share the one about which
ripping
one?
apart the house.
Yeah, ripping apart the house. That's a good one.
As a five that moves to seven in stress, I remember coming home once from a work thing and I was feeling not awesome, let's just say. The event had been stressful and I came home from the trip. I got dropped off. I walk in the back door. My husband's in the kitchen, the house that we used to live in. And I literally, this is like core memory kind of thing for me, barely set the suitcase down. And I say to him, hey, we need to remodel the living room. And he just looks at me. And I was like, yeah, I think we should do that. I've been thinking about it. We need to remodel the living room. And when we took on this project, we lived in a house that was built in the early 1900s at the time, like 1904 or something like that. And this meant like plaster, ripping plaster out.
Glass and plaster and
Yes.
like
Refinishing the
insulation that's
floor.
fallen to the wall, like so
Yeah, the whole thing, right? Like
just
new
a little
drywall,
asbestos. Just a little
just a little. It's fine. We didn't die. Nobody has
sprinkle.
mesothelioma, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we're
but
sevening, we're
it's fine.
sevening.
Yeah,
Everybody's fine.
everybody's fine. So,
Everybody
but that's like, that can be like that mode is this like impulse to take on something, to do something big, to create a change, to avoid the painful feeling. I don't know. And at some point, we'll definitely, just like every number, have to interview a seven who can speak to it from like the true core motivation. But I have read sometimes with sevens that in their attempt to avoid the painful feeling, they can sometimes turn to substances in that I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to use this to avoid the feeling. And I don't think sevens are the only number that does that. I'm not trying to say that in any way,
Mm.
but I have read about that can be a tendency within sevens because that desire to avoid the painful feeling is so
Yeah.
strong.
The other thing too is like that could show up like obsessively working out,
Sure.
getting that serotonin boost or that adrenaline boost or any of those things that it could read like an addictive personality.
One of the things that I sometimes say when I teach the Enneagram to groups, and this could be taken a variety of ways, and so I don't mean to trigger anyone who's listening to this. Although if you are triggered, that might be a signal of something else. And that is they talk about sevens having a half range of emotions, all on the positive side, right? So they don't when we talk about fours, right? Fours like those darker, twisty, uncomfortable emotions. Sevens do not. Sevens want to live in the brighter,
Yeah.
happier half side of emotions.
Yeah. I think important to note that sevens in stress they go to one, right, Holly? So
Yeah.
that could look like them controlling something or trying to control something. So I would agree that even in stress, that half range of emotion shows up. The other thing that we should mention in relation to that half range of emotion, another watch out for seven is that it can at times read inauthentic because they are so happy all the time.
It can
Um,
be hard for people to read that as real because
yep.
who's like that all the time?
I think that it's important for a seven to understand why that might be the case because some sevens might feel like they might read some people as standoffish to them because of that. And maybe those people that you're reading as standoffish to you need a minute to understand that no, that's actually your personality. You are just that positive and
Yeah.
happy.
Just positive and happy. Yes. I think it goes back to some of the stuff we talk about in some of the episodes, right? About assuming positive intent. We don't,
Yeah.
nobody's in, I shouldn't say nobody, most people's intent is not bad and even, or inauthentic. I really don't think a lot of people are walking around trying to be inauthentic. So sometimes we just have to try to read it for what it is instead of in our own insecurities, like assigning something to it. The seven's orientation to time is the future. So I thought we should touch on that a little bit here. That orient for them, the orientation to time being the future is that like planning the next exciting thing. What do we get to do next? Where do we get to go next? And I remember talking to a seven who was, when we were talking about it, was talking about how it shows up in their day-to-day life, like every day. So maybe they're having breakfast with their kids and the inability to be present in the moment of that breakfast to just be like as they're eating being like where are we going for dinner, what are we having for dinner, let's just jump to the end of the day like it just started, right? So it's sort of that always exciting planning, what are we doing, where are we going, what happens
Hmm.
next, when are we eating again. Yeah.
Something I'm really jealous of sevens is that they have the ability to think so fast. They process things so quickly, and to keep up with them is sometimes challenging. But I wish I had that ability to process and think towards my solution or whatever I need the answer to be for what I'm thinking about that quickly.
I agree. As someone who tends to process really slowly, I do wish for that also. That ability to think really fast, connect the dots really fast, get to the find solutions really fast.
Mhm.
I wish I had some of that.
It's actually helpful for me sometimes because I verbally process information in my two-ness, where a seven can really complement that to a certain extent. But sometimes I feel like the watch out in that for a seven is that they've maybe changed so many different things together And that's how they've arrived at that one answer. And then when I'm verbally processing with a 7, sometimes they're like, well, this, and this, and that's why. And I'm like, I haven't even thought of that first thing that you mentioned yet, all of the possible potential outcomes of that. So the watch out could be that they're missing information because they're
Yeah,
moving so quickly.
because they're moving so quickly. I think too, 7s are reframers. That's one of sort of the key traits of them in their thinking style. That can be amazing, right? To a negative situation happens and they positively reframe it pretty quickly. If it happened for a reason, whatever the reason is, or,
Yeah.
just like kind of stepping into that reframe really fast. What can happen though, and the example I'll give is when I was getting certified for the IQ 9, during part of that certification, they like pair you up with someone else to kind of go through this exercise where you talk about problems, how you problem solve and share advice, right? It's a coaching certification, so essentially it's like practice coaching. I got paired up with this woman who was a 7, and she started sharing with me her thing that she wanted to share to work through. And as we were talking through that, at one point she stopped me where was kind of sharing my advice or however you want to say it in the conversation. She sort of stopped me and she's like, well, here's the problem that I have with that is like, as the words are leaving your mouth, I am already reframing them. Like I'm already changing them. Like they've barely left your mouth. Then the question becomes, well, if you are thinking that quickly, amazing. Gosh, amazing to be able to process so fast. But to your earlier point, like you're not really listening then. You're taking it in so fast and turning it so quickly that you're not maybe hearing everything that you need to hear.
Yeah, that's where if you're trying to give coaching advice or feedback to a 7, it's like a little bit of they have to sit on their hands
Mm-hmm.
where they need to actually hear what is coming out. Step number 1, that's challenging for them, actually hearing it. Step number 2 is not reframing it to somehow be anything other than what you're trying to share with them very directly. That can be where sometimes a 7 is just really frustrating for me, is where if I'm trying to have a really authentic conversation and I'm trying to share something, they're positively reframing it for one. If I'm having a feeling, they're like making it positive and I'm like, I'm pissed right now. Let me be mad about this thing for a second instead of telling me 10 reasons why everything's going to be fine. And the other thing is if what I am sharing is like a reality, like a harsh reality, they're somehow putting a wall up or reframing. If it's about them specifically, one thing I've learned about a 7 in my personal life is that it really triggers them for me to tell them, hey, that doesn't feel good, or I need you to do that differently with me because this is the impact it had on me. Well, that's not what I meant. I'm like, got it. Assume positive intent. However, that was the
Yeah.
impact.
Well, and that goes back to, we'll have to add this to our list for future podcasts, but how different Enneagram types, their intentions and their impact of those intentions. Because it
Hmm.
goes back to the idea, if you do a lot of personal development work, this won't be news to you, but it's that we need to get to a point where we own both our intentions and our impact. So even
Right.
if our intentions are good, but they had a negative impact, we need to also own the impact.
I know a 7 in my life. He is like the most wonderful human being you could ever be around. Like he's so fun. He's so energetic. I'm normally around him in social settings and he just has this like amazing energy to be around. And I'm going to describe him in a couple of different scenarios. One, he's a family member of mine. If he listens to this, he's totally going to know I'm talking about him. But he's the guy that, I'm not kidding you, like on vacation, he'll just like bust out a ukulele and just start like living his best life, singing, strumming his ukulele. But he is pretty amazing as a parent. So he has 2 young kids, and the level of patience and like positivity, you're a literal saint. I can't compete with you. Like your kids are like going to so much appreciate that someday where you're like, "Oh, I see you're having that feeling. Like, here, can we do this?" Like he's the best at like offering up a second option because he's a 7,
Awesome.
right? It's like, "Okay, I see you're having that feeling," which is great that he does that because that's
Yeah.
probably not like his,
Not,
natural
yeah.
reaction. But then it's like, "Okay, how can we do this differently?" I'm like, "God, you're such a good dad." And he's always the one that's, like, playing with the kids, like, he's always on the floor, like, playing with all of them, having so much fun, doing the silly voices and all of the
Yeah.
things. He's married to my best friend and family member who is a 6, which is wild. Like, that's another, like, add it to the podcast list, like, wing
Yeah.
marriages, but he is, like, if I could put a picture of a human being as a 7, like,
Yeah.
never been more sure about an Enneagram than that.
Well, and like all that's so amazing too, where they just want to get into it with their kids and enjoy all of that. I think that's awesome because I know that there are other numbers who maybe struggle with that a
Oh,
little bit
yeah.
more. So that's amazing. I was thinking a little bit about the 7s and the work that maybe they would want to think about doing in terms of how we talk about that half range of emotions. And it's not dissimilar to the 5. And we mentioned this in the last 2 podcasts, but 7s sit in the thinking triad with 5s and 6s. So back to your side note, but that wing marriage is also interesting because they both sit in the same triad. So that's very
Mhm.
curious, also very
Yeah.
curious to me too. So anyway, I'll stop being a 5 for a second there. That was a very 5 moment. But thinking about the 7s and the work for them to do would be, can they find their way into the uncomfortable emotions and sit with them and not try to bury them or numb them or avoid them with something exciting? Because there's a lot of healing to be done in that space that you might not realize you need to do if you're a 7 who's just constantly avoided or reframed or moved on or whatever it is.
I would have so many questions for a 7 that maybe is doing some of that deep work in terms of start of the process, like, how did you feel? Where do you sit in the process now? Where do you want to be to show up really integrated? And
Yeah.
because I think to the earlier point about the emotional pain, and we mention Brandon every podcast. Shameless plug again. Evolved
Shameless plug.
Athlete, Brandon.
Yeah.
Holly and I both do work with Brandon individually on our own development, and that can be pretty painful sometimes from an emotional standpoint to have to unearth some of your experiences that are holding you back or that have taken up some energetic space that aren't serving you anymore. For a 7, that could be really, really difficult. I wonder if it would be easy for them to even recall first, you know? Because, like, Brandon will start a session and be like, okay, what do you want to talk about today? I'll present him with my issue that happened. He's like, okay, take a deep breath. Where do you feel that?
Yeah.
I'm like, right
Yeah.
here. Is a 7 like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really feel it anywhere. I'm Gucci.
Maybe
I'm good.
I don't know. Could be. As a 5, I have a real hard time some days finding the spot where I feel it. It would be so interesting. Gonna definitely have to talk to a 7 about that. I was thinking about, 7s that kind of show up in leadership positions that
Oh,
I've
sure.
interacted with in the past. And I will say, I do have such appreciation for them as inspiring leaders. They do a really good job of sort of being the cheerleader, the inspirational one. And that when you think about enthusiastic visionary as sort of a title, it definitely that would be one reason why I could be
Yeah,
drawn to them in terms of leadership style. They can paint that bigger picture and make you believe that it's possible.
I would totally agree with that. I would say, though, that me being a 2, this is very 2 what I'm about to say. Who's filling their cup? Because, like, they are that cheerleader, they are that inspirational person. Like, maybe the work for a 7 could be the vulnerability it would take to allow somebody else in enough to understand how to fill your cup.
I think that's fair. And I think, when we think about the emotions in the 7 that maybe they're burying, just like 5s and 6s, 7s are trying to solve for a feeling of anxiety. And they do it through this fun avoidance of pain, forward looking kind of way of being in the world. So it's another place where, maybe there's some looking into what you're solving for there. And maybe you don't need to solve for it anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I do have another sort of 7-y story I can share. And this is how I know I still have a lot of work to do on my line to 7. This story, it's a few years ago, so it might be better if I were to do the same thing today. But shortly after learning the Enneagram, it was like 2019-ish, so I'd known about it for a little while, was newly familiar with the IQ 9 at that time. But for my husband and I, for our anniversary, we decided to go to California. I mentioned that before. We love to travel to California. This was one of our first trips there. We were going to visit a friend of ours who, at the time, worked for Facebook. We decided what we were going to do. I decided, right? Because I'm trying to grow. I'm trying to like stretch into like uncomfortable things. I decided we were not going to make any plans. So book the flight,
Oh my
reserve
God.
the car,
I have
make
anxiety
0
thinking
plans.
about that.
This is me challenging
My God.
myself. Like, no hotels booked,
Oh my
no
God.
agenda. We go on this trip and we get there and it starts out really well. So we like fly into SFO. It's fine. It's for our anniversary. The car guy like upgrades our car for free when he finds out we're there for our anniversary. Like amazing, right?
Amazing.
So good. We
You're like,
start
this is working out.
this is working. We start into the trip, and the first night we stayed with our friend, it was less of a problem. We let him show us around again. So, no issue with not having plans because we had a host, a guide. Well, the next night, we're like on our own. We decide we're going to drive down the Pacific Coast Highway to Santa Cruz. So, we drive to Santa Cruz, and we're going to stay in Santa Cruz for, I can't remember if we were going to stay 1 or 2 nights, whatever it was. We pull into a hotel, just like normal Hampton or something like that. Pull into a hotel, fully booked. So we call another hotel, fully booked. Apparently, so there's the University of California, Santa Cruz, obviously in Santa Cruz. There was something going on.
Oh no.
And every hotel was booked, all of them. We find a place that is available,
This is how
has a
horror
room.
movies start, I would like to add.
This is exactly how they start. It is exactly like that. It's the motel with like the railing on the outside and
No.
all the
No
doors like
shot.
face the outside.
Nope.
We get a
I'm out.
room and it's one of those like you unlock the door and you like step on the carpet and it's like sticky. And this hotel room maybe hasn't been updated since like 1985. You know what I mean? It's that whole vibe. And immediately I have like retreated right back into my five. I was like, this is why I cannot do this. I cannot. Like we made it like,
We're
I don't know, not even 48 hours. And I'm like ready to lose my shit because I have to sleep in this hotel room where like you wish you had a black light, but you don't really want to know.
no.
Terrible.
No.
Terrible. Where if I had just like done my normal 5 thing, right, we would have known that there was something going on. We would have
Memories.
pre-booked the hotel, right? Yeah.
You made memories.
I described this to a 7 once. This is what we did and like how horribly wrong it went. And she was like, oh my God, no, that sounds amazing. Like,
No.
she's like, oh no. She's like, I would get in my car, just me and my husband, throw a suitcase in the back, don't know where we're going, and just drive and like have no idea where we're going to end up. No, thank you.
No. 0 out of 10 for me. Zeros.
Yeah.
All
Yes.
around. Not happening.
So,
Can't do it.
yeah.
As you were talking, I'm like, were there bed bugs? Like, were there, like,
Who knows? Who
what are
knows?
we dealing with here?
We made it out alive.
Brown recluse spiders behind the headboards. Somebody probably died in there. You have a spirit attached to your body now because
Yeah.
things like a 6.
But that
Who
feels
knows?
super fun to a lot of 7s, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
let's
like
just
the
like,
no, mm-mm. No, no, no. Can't do that. Can't do that. I would love to know like how many 7s go on like reality TV shows or like
oh,
TV
sure.
shows that like are like Naked and Afraid.
It's a great
I
question.
feel like it's just a bunch of 8s and 7s walking around, just
Yeah.
being warriors. at life.
Yeah. Or maybe I could see sevens like The Amazing Race. Is that even still on? They still do that
I
one?
don't know. Like at Survivor's on its like 150th season, I think.
But yeah,
I
any of
think.
those feel like prime time
Oh,
opportunity for a seven. Yeah. Big Brother. Big Brother also feels like,
a seven would,
yeah.
I would love to see the ratio of like the winners of Big Brother and how many of them were Enneagram
Yeah.
7.
Sometimes when we watch reality TV, and I don't watch a ton of reality TV these days because the world and I need,
Yeah, I'm a junkie
but yeah,
on reality.
I can be. I can be. I love a good real estate show. But what I was going to say is that we watched they made a reality show of the TV show from Korea. What was that called?
Squid Game?
Squid
That
Game.
one?
So, yes, so we did watch that one. And I remember watching it, and as the characters, as the people sort of are like winding down and like dying off on the show, whatever,
Mhm.
I found myself analyzing the people that were on the show and being like, I think that one's an 8. That one's got to be a
That's
7.
funny.
That one's got to be, yes. So
That's funny.
that's one of the reasons why sometimes I can't do the reality shows. I'll like find myself
Oh, I do that
make
with
it,
Love is Blind
yes.
all the time.
Yeah.
Love is
Make
Blind, Summer House. I'm like,
Well, I've never watched that.
I've got most of
Yeah.
them typed in my head, I think. The kids have been watching Inside Out too. Joy,
Hmm.
7. She's a
Definitely.
7, like the poster
Yes,
child of a 7. It's like
for
sadness. Oh,
sure.
you're such a drag.
Which is a very 7 thing. Just because we typed Schitt's Creek, Alexis Rose is who we type as a 7 from Schitt's Creek most often.
Oh, a little bit Alexis.
Because she's always, everything is always this sort of happy
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
opportunity on the bright side.
absolutely. That is funny. How would you say, I guess, through the same vein of slowing down and giving feedback or having difficult moments with a 7, what would your tips be for somebody who is involved in conflict with a
With
7?
a 7. Well, I think there's a bunch of nuance in the situation. But in conflict with a 7, it's going to be helping them hear you. I'm trying to think of the how to describe this the best way possible, but it's when you're in conflict or you're needing, I guess it's more if you're needing to give feedback to the 7, conflict might be a little different. But if you need to give feedback to a 7, because I'm going to come back to conflict style. All right. You need to give feedback to a 7. It's important to make sure they heard you. So that would be asking them to kind of replay it back to you if you need to, or pausing them and saying maybe it's even something like, I need you to let me finish before you jump in, and then we can talk through it more. But let me get to the end of what I need to say, because they're going to be thinking so quickly and think that they know what you're going to say before you say it that they might try to jump ahead and interrupt. And so
Mhm.
it could just help you get through the conversation with them to frame it up for them in such a way that you need them to pause. Like, I need you to wait until I'm done. So I think about
Sure.
that in terms of feedback in a conflict situation. And we haven't talked about conflict styles about all the other numbers yet. We will. But a 7's conflict style is avoidant. And most of the time, they do not want the conflict at all anyway. If a conflict arises, their instinct is going to be to get through it as quickly as possible, or
Mhm.
maybe not at all. Again, avoidant. How do I get around this to the other side as if it didn't happen? If you find yourself in a conflict with a 7, you might have to be the instigator of working it out because they're going to want to move through it really quickly. Yep, good. I'm good. Got it. We're fine. We're totally fine. Don't need to go there. When underneath they might be still seething and they might be showing up passive aggressive or
I was just saying that a
sarcastic.
hallmark for a 7
Yeah,
is like that passive
passive
aggressive, like,
aggressive. I'm still mad, but I don't actually want to get into it with you because that's uncomfortable. So I'm
mhm.
just gonna be maybe a little snide or a little sarcastic, a little passive aggressive, which can be really hard for all the people around them who are used to them being bright, sunny, positive people that when it sort of comes in a little biting, a little undercutting.
Yeah, that's tough. as a 7, right? Because everyone's expecting you to be this like bright, shiny, fun, energetic person. And if you're going through something, sometimes for a 7, it reads like I have a vibe and I'm not happy. And then people are like, well, wait a minute. I want you to be that happy, fun, shiny
Yeah.
thing that fills my cup. So it's pretty easy to spot when a 7 is pissed. At least I can tell pretty
Yeah.
easily when a 7 is upset. But that's hard because there's
Yeah.
that thing that people have gotten used to of that kind of energy. And if you don't have it because you're having a feeling about something or you're going through something and you don't want to
Yeah.
talk about it because you're
And you
kind
don't want
of
to talk about
avoidant.
it. I think, and that's the key of it. Everybody will, I should say, I should not speak in absolutes. Most people will be really forgiving if you can be honest with them. Like, hey, I'm feeling insecure about XYZ, so therefore I need a little space or I need a little time. And to your earlier point about the vulnerability, can 7s find the vulnerability with the people around them to say, I am not at my best today. Here's what's up.
You took the word right out of my brain. It's that vulnerability that a 7 is going to have to take a minute to understand the feeling they have, and that is uncomfortable for them. So looking inward at that and then having it translate out into a moment of vulnerability is something that would be really powerful for a 7, but it's going to take a lot of energy to do that. That's the hard work. We talk about it all the time. That's the discomfort and the development that comes from doing something that doesn't feel natural.
And if your goal is to grow it and to find your way out of the 7 box into a more integrated, well-rounded human, that's what it's going to take. It's going to be showing up and being vulnerable and letting people know what's really going on.
Right. I don't think we're missing anything. I want people to write in their questions or comment questions or things that resonate so we can start pulling a few of those up when we chat
Yeah.
here, call each of those out. So if anyone listening has the opportunity to just shoot a quick note of like when you said this, that's what hit, or when you said X, or that maybe that doesn't feel aligned
Yeah.
with how you feel. And we would love to hear it either way.
If you're interested in being the interviewed any one of the 9 numbers, definitely shoot us a note about that too. I did have a question from a friend via text. So, like we
Great.
talked about last week, we were like, you can shoot those messages via text, we'll take them.
Yeah.
But it was really around subtypes. And so I know we're planning to do a deep dive on subtypes. So I don't want to go into that right now, but I promise in the like first, after the all 9 numbers, we'll get into subtypes and wings probably for sure in that first one after. But I just wanted to acknowledge that I heard you. I got it. We're not going to miss it.
Awesome. That's exciting. Anything else you'd add about our 7s before we wrap on this particular number?
I would just say again, I love a 7. And I do truly, even though we've talked about all the work they could do, I truly do, if I could choose, would choose a 7. And I work hard to lean a little bit into the 7 energy as a 5 and try to find space for that in my life. So yeah, I love the 7s.
I can't wait to unpack 8s. But a reminder for everybody to give us a follow, subscribe, find us on Apple for podcasts, Spotify. Give us a rating, please.
Yeah, leave us a
And
review.
follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is Enneagram Adventure. And you can find some content on there as well. Shoot us a message via email if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will chat next week through 8s.
The 8 episode, that should be exciting. We both have a good number of 8s in our lives. So we'll have
Yes.
some personal examples, and I might have to like call my mom or my brothers ahead of that one because we might talk about them.
Oh, my husband's an 8, and I will have some stories. And this is my stress line, 8.
Yeah, it's
So
the growth line for 5. We got all kinds of 8 energy to talk about. Okay,
awesome.
cool.
Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, I'll talk to you
Happy
later.
Saturday.
Happy Saturday. Yeah, not a Sunday today.
Not a
All right.
Sunday. All right.
Bye.
Bye.